Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our informative webinar on how network-aware applications can control network resources on demand. My name is Ashish Jain. I'm the founder of Private LTE and 5G.com, an industry publication focused exclusively on the adoption of cellular networks by enterprises. I'm also the CEO of Kairos Pulse, a strategy consulting and technology marketing firm specializing in helping telecom companies, system integrators, and enterprises navigate this dynamic landscape. I'll be your host and moderator for our panel discussion today. Today, we are going to discuss many amazing possibilities when applications become network aware. Networks such as Wi-Fi, 4G, and 5G are increasingly becoming programmable, offering much more advanced capabilities for applications to control and interact with various network services such as security, location, bandwidth, and latency. Network-aware applications revolutionize the control enterprises can have over ensuring predictable outcomes for their business and mission-critical applications. Our guests will share real-world examples of applications that have been transformed by network awareness and how network-aware API can simply integrate it for portability of network services across any kind of programmable networks. Before we begin, here are a few logistic announcements. This webinar is being recorded. We don't plan to use any slides today, so we'll keep it conversational. So if you have any questions, please bring it on. And all right, then we are now all set. Let's begin by having our experts tell us a little bit about yourself. Kevin, you want to start?
Yeah, thank you, Ashish, and very happy to be here. I'm Kevin Patterson. I'm the Chief Product Officer for Shibodi. I've been in the telecom space for roughly about 36 years. A lot of that time was spent working at the network level, APIs, building products to accentuate or expose networking capabilities. I've also been leading CPaaS efforts and activities for a number of years, and in Shibodi, now working to drive the topic and the adoption of network awareness.
Great. Dean, why don't we have you go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Dean Bubley. I'm an industry analyst and advisor, and also a sort of general technology futurist. I have been following the evolution of private wireless networks since about 2001, and also communication services and CPaaS since about 2012. And throughout that period, I've also been looking at the role of programmable networks, going back to small cells with APIs back to I think 2008, something like that. But more recently, I've been focused on a variety of areas, whether that's private cellular using 4 and 5G. A lot of work I do on spectrum policy at the moment, looking out to the future of 5G and then 6G, as well as Wi-Fi and various other wireless technologies, including satellite as well. But here I'll be talking primarily about the difference. I'll come back to in a moment between network-aware applications and application-aware networks.
Great, that's a great topic to cover. Stephen, why don't we go next with you?
Hey, thank you. My name is Stephen Boer. I am a principal director at Booz Allen Hamilton. I'm in a group at Booz Allen called our Chief Technology Office, Bright Labs. My team's focus of effort is research and development and prototyping of 5G to next G networking and applications. Within my team, we focus on everything from how to build private 5G networks. We're doing next generation research into 6G technologies, such as ISAC and integrated instances in communications, AI, applicability of AI within the radio access network. Additionally, we're looking at network aware applications, how to build next generation applications that take advantage of the full advantage of the capability that 5G and eventually 6G are going to provide.
All right. So you are the person who is actually doing it. So we will hear more. Rob, why don't we go next with you?
Yeah, so my name is Rob Curver, founding partner, CPaaS Acceleration Alliance. I've only been in the telecom business for about 20 years. Started with hosted voice cloud communications, and then spent some years working with operators on, let's say, corporate innovation. Encountered some of the challenges at that time at operators when we started talking about APIs and opening the networks and giving basically developers access and control over those precious networks. We started doing that in 2017, 18. And last couple of years really focused on CPaaS. And when I say CPaaS, it's communication platform in the broadest possible sense of the word, right? So what we're seeing today, we have about 100 members in our alliance now. We started this about a year and a half ago. And the focus there is on all sorts of communications, including network APIs. A lot of our members are operators that are, let's say, looking at things like Project Camara, Open Gateway Initiative, and what to do with these APIs, how to go about it, and really what the use cases are. Where's the money going to be made? That's the number one question right now, I would say. But it's really interesting to see how the network capabilities are becoming a part of that whole platform approach in CPaaS. I'm really happy to be on this call with this great set of gentlemen with experience in all these different areas that we're going to touch on.
Well, I think a common thread across all of us we have is the programmable communications and now programmable networks. So first of all, thank you all being here today with me. Dean, why don't we have you kick it off by giving, by defining what do we really mean by programmable networks, network API that has become, or telco API that has become a buzzword these days. Although I don't think that is anything new, but why is it a buzzword now? And what do we mean by network aware applications?
Right. Okay. There's quite a lot to unpack on that. I do have some slides as backup if I need, but I'm going to try, unless you want me to, I'll just try and talk through this because I think it makes more sense to just explain in the round. So there's long been a desire for networks to respond and interact with applications, so that either the application adapts or the network adapts, or they pass information between them so that you can have optimal performance, as well as optimal security, cost, privacy, and all the other dimensions as well. Going back a few years, the majority of interest, I would say, in the mobile world, and I'll talk about fixed a little bit later on as well, the emphasis in mobile, certainly from the operator and vendor side, was what I'll call application-aware networks, where you have a policy management platform inside the network that maybe recognizes video streams, perhaps it adjusted the bit rate or even the frame rate and resolution of the images, what was called at the time video optimization. There was a lot of discussion that led on to sort of net neutrality type arguments about whether the network could selectively prioritize or deprioritize certain applications. So the emphasis there was very much from the sort of top-down control view of the world of application-aware networks. And I've always been a bit of a skeptic of that, because I see faster evolution in the application space than on the network side. And also, just application developers understand their applications and where they're used, how they're used, and how they're important they are, more than service providers do. So, for example, if it's video, the network doesn't know if it's a cat video or instructions for a vet. Yeah, and so without understanding the context, you can't manage the network appropriately to the end user requirements. Whereas the application developer or the end user are much more aware of what they really want to achieve from something, and whether it's a video or whether it's controlling a drone or a robot or an AGV or a million other applications we see, particularly the enterprise and B2B context. So for me, there's always been a desire to see more network awareness from the application side. And there is a bit you get in, I'll say, smartphone applications. Networks know if they're on Wi-Fi or if they're on cellular. So you've often got controls which say in the app, only download updates over unmetered connections, Wi-Fi basically. So there's been a certain amount of network awareness inbuilt into the apps. What we're now seeing is the ability for applications to query the network about performance potential, capabilities, and in some cases to control or ask for certain characteristics from the networks. Now, I have to say, I'll put my hand up here. I've commonly referred to myself as a slice denier or a slicing skeptic. I don't buy the argument about the sort of the general purpose slicing of 5G networks at a macro national level. I think that's it's an interesting vision, but I see lots of issues and problems with that, especially around network coverage. Where I see more interest in this sort of quality on demand concept is in particular locations where the network has been engineered specifically to support those applications. So, for example, a private network is a great example. It could be a port or a mine or an airport or a factory or a warehouse, where the designers of that network at least have some vision of the fact that it's used for machine vision, or it's used for drones, or it's used for security cameras or something like that. It could be in the carefully engineered wireless at particular venues. So you might well find that for the Olympics this week, actually, there's a very, very heavily engineered network designed to support, say, the broadcasters or the ticket gates or something like that, where they put in additional network resources, perhaps even got local licensed spectrum for those applications, but it's able to support the applications, whether it's through an API or some other mechanism for QoS. And perhaps we'll see it in future on public networks, in particularly outdoor areas. I've got a big thing about indoor wireless and how the fact that outdoor to indoor cellular is often terrible and it's certainly unpredictable. But I think that where we see a lot of interest for high quality and deterministic and network aware applications is in those either private venues where there's a specific dedicated network, or in public venues like a sports arena where someone's taken the time and trouble to actually check that the radio bit of it works the way they want it to. So I'll pass that over and say, in those situations, you can start doing clever things with the application of the network because you've got the intelligence and resources on both sides of that divide.
I think that's a great way of explaining it in terms of, I'm personally also more subscribed to the idea of the application should have the intelligence to know what network resources to use. But I'll pick up on a few things you said. Heavily engineered network. And that's an interesting way of describing it, right? Because so far, if you look at wherever a more deterministic application performance is required, and a network had to be engineered a bit more, heavily to assure some predictability and certainty and deterministic behavior of that application. Now, Kevin, I'm going to go to you with network awareness and integrating network APIs with applications and bringing that intelligence to applications. How does that solve the problem? Does it still have to be heavily engineered to a specific application performance, or does it make the whole application and network interaction much more dynamic and takes away that pain of heavy engineering?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that I think we would all agree that in the most optimal case, the network is engineered to carry all of the traffic that's required. And you would have resource availability, and you would have basically the number of resources across all the applications that would make them all work very well. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. In fact, that's usually not the case. But it's very expensive to not only get all the equipment, but to keep the network tuned to that level and have all of the resources operating at their optimal level. So what network awareness does is it looks at what is the the optimal usage of the network resources for the applications that are running across the network. Oftentimes, the applications are in conflict with each other. They don't cooperate. They sit there and they're greedy. They will use whatever resources are available to them. So network awareness basically means that what we do is introduce the concept of resource control to the application level. They can call through a series of APIs, whether it's asking for prioritization, asking for more bandwidth, asking for whatever resource is required at the given time to give them the experience they need. The network awareness aspect of it basically allows for prioritization across whatever network is available. So if it's a wired network, great. Let's make sure that the network is behaving properly. Usually the resources are sufficient to allow some level of application performance. When it comes into a wireless network, now we have to worry about the connectivity level. We have to worry about the signal level. There's a number of elements there. On top of that, you have to look at, well, what's the consumption of the resources? What's the capacity, and how are we exposing and using these resources without over-engineering the network? And I think that's one of the key parts is, what is the optimal engineering? Usually you're into over-engineering the network, which is increasing the cost. So what we look to do with network awareness is make sure that we can prioritize an application. So a first responder application, let's say, would be more important than a shopping application. So therefore, when a first responder application comes in, let's make sure it gets the resources that are required, to be able to work optimally in whatever network setting is required. So yeah, when you're working with prioritization and you're looking at understanding what network resources are available, you can overcome some of the deficiencies in the network and work to a more optimal outcome for certain types of applications, especially in highly congested environments.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna come back to you in a minute because there are a few things that you triggered my thought, right? Stephen, you said you are working on creating applications which are optimally running on 4G, 5G, 6G, and even next G networks. And you worked with Shibodi in some cases to build such application. Can you describe the pain point you had to go through in previously and how these APIs are helping your application? In fact, if you can explain the application you've created.
Yeah, sure. So I think take a step back and talk about some of the context of how we first got involved in this, and the first use case where network awareness became an important factor in the application. We were looking at a use case around a first responder use case around a mobile medic in the field, and the network connectivity was not always the quality of the network connectivity was not always guaranteed. So, I agree with Dean's point around that pre-planned large events are going to have a very robust network and built to the demand that they expect to be there. But in certain disaster scenarios where you're leveraging private 5G or other ad hoc network connectivity, there's not always the guarantee that you're going to have the maximum amount of spectrum availability to meet everybody's needs. So the scenario we looked at was, okay, you have first responders, medics responding to incidents, and they need telementoring advice on how to do specific procedures in a field environment, maybe in response to a disaster scenario, an urban or rural disaster scenario. How can you make the application network aware to assess what bandwidth is available, and then tailor the communications back to a more experienced doctor, nurse, a medical practitioner that can provide real-time feedback to someone in the field conducting a triage. This could be in a training environment or in a real-world scenario. So that was the pretext and the context that we looked at, and the the focus initially was, okay, what can we do with private 5G? What can we do with? Yeah, we experimented with network slicing and the ability to move application data between network slices on demand. We looked at quality of service within a network slice. Um, Looked at the potential of there being multiple means of network connectivity, and how maybe you could do a single API call to a solution like Shaboti that's integrated with multiple network connectivity means to provide that reliable connectivity back. And then we looked at what happens and when network connectivity improves and the application can leverage more resources or less resources. How do we smartly degrade capability so that you still have the baseline connectivity needed? So that was the context and the experimentation we were doing with our clients. And that led to kind of our first application that we developed in this kind of modern sense of network aware, and how to do that quality of service on demand. And a real world proof point of the applicability of this is we were actually able to do this in a field environment where we were a first responder was in a training environment, and they were able to have real time communication back to a professional to train them on how to do a certain procedure, and then they were able to pass that procedure first time in their test to get certified in doing that procedure. So it was a really cool little proof point that the technology is valuable, and it really can make a difference in that kind of that first responder world.
How was your experience overall in terms of, do you think the technology is ready to go prime time?
I think the technology is there. I think that the 3GPP and 5G have done a good job of standardizing how applications can interface, and I think that there are vendors that are making the APIs available. Now it's the next step is really commercially the carriers finding a good way to implement that so that applications can integrate. But on a private 5G network, there's definitely applicability there.
Great. Rob, I'm going to switch to you. Stephen mentioned about communication application where they're using network APIs. Do you see that as a more common ground where the communication applications will leverage network more holistically? And how do you see that integration in a broader scheme of CPaaS activities?
Well, I think there are different kinds of APIs when you think of the network, right? There's one of the more popular CPaaS use cases has been one-time password, so basically user verification for a long time. There's a class of network APIs that can address that and play in that field, which is very, very different from what we're now talking about in terms of quality. So I think there's not a one size fits all. It's a very fragmented space. There are different use cases and different solutions or possible solutions, technologies becoming available. The sort of the holy grail, if you will, for network APIs now is for the entire world, every operator to implement all these network APIs, let's say this year or as soon as possible, and then everybody can go crazy. I don't think that's how it's going to work. We're going to see use case by use case, region by region, and I like what Stephen talked about. These are very specific use cases where it makes sense. There's a clear win, right, in terms of in a situation of life or death. Every improvement you can get is helpful, and I think we're just at the early stage right now where CPaaS is becoming, let's say, enriched with all these new network APIs. We're starting to learn as an industry what they can do, how some of these network APIs can maybe replace some of the more traditional things, and how new things can be done and can get done for totally different use cases. But I think the use case is key. I mean, this is something we shouldn't be talking too much about the technology or the operator. I mean, the technology is there, and there's all these operators, there's all these different network networks that have to somehow have a place, but it starts with, what do you want to do? What problem do you want to solve? What's the business case? I mean, who's going to actually want to spend money to solve that problem? Who finds it important enough to find that solution, to build that solution? And I think then we're going to need companies like Shabodi are crucial to get there, right? Somewhere there's such a big gap between the operator and the end customer or a developer that ultimately consumes stuff. There's so much that we still need to figure out and find out, because it's pretty new, right? Opening these networks. I remember I mentioned an earlier project I did at a telco in 16, 17, where we were looking at building an API store and opening the network. And the response at that time from the network team was they would kick us out of the room just for daring to suggest that we'd open a network, because first of all, there was no manpower to work on APIs, and second, it would be very dangerous to expose the network to actors and hackers, and then thirdly, why would you expose your network and to your competition? Now, this is only 7 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, and we're living in a totally new time. Things in this space don't usually move as quickly as we'd like. Let me try to be very careful with my wording here. It takes time. There are serious issues to look at. I mean, we are talking about big investments and basically this whole network thing is pretty sensitive. But I'm pretty amazed with the progress that has been made in these last couple of years, and especially the way it's been made, right? With different companies, organizations coming together. It's not just the operators that are trying to do this. It's the hyperscalers that are playing a role. It's companies like Shabodi that are really trying to fill that gap between technology and customer and solutions. And we see the integrators in different shapes and forms coming up, and it's exciting. I think it's really cool to see that this industry is changing, and is trying to do smarter things, even though it's not easy.
Yeah, no, I think I totally agree. There's a lot happening, a lot of interesting progress happening to the surprise and the progress the industry has made overall. And I think we'll see tons of different applications and, companies like Booz Allen coming in and, putting a stick in the ground saying, hey, we will build those applications and we will not wait for the operators to go and, create those applications, because it has been a supplier-led market in many cases. And that's the reason why it hasn't picked up or been successful as much. But now a lot more players are coming in and seeing the opportunity to do it. So Dean, you have a
Yeah.
point to make here.
Yeah, I think it's important to start thinking about categorization of applications. And I mean, Kevin mentioned before the sort of what I term uncooperative applications, and maybe talk about that. But I think that at a very basic level, it's important when we talk about networks and network APIs to distinguish very crudely between screens and machines. And there's a certain set of things which are visual or vocal. We're doing it now, for example, where there is some form of voice or video communications, probably between people at the end of things, but perhaps where the camera is elsewhere. And I think there's a particular subset of those which are what I'll call composable communications, which is the sort of stuff which Stephen was talking about. Or you could imagine, let's say a mining company wants to fly a drone over the pile of what are called mine tailings to make sure there isn't a risk of collapse. And so you've got a camera on the drone, you've got the drone operator who might be wearing a sort of first person headset to steer the drone, but you may well also network in a subject matter expert who could be remote, who is looking to see signs of slippage or dangerous accumulations of debris in one place or something like that. that could represent a risk of collapse of the tailings or dam or something like that. And so there you've got this sort of very complex, you've got video coming from the drone camera, some of it going to the operator, some going to the remote expert. You might have the remote expert then telling the drone operator go left or zoom in here a bit closer. The drone operator may want to have a warning flash up saying you are nearing the edge of network coverage if you go too much further in that direction. And so there you've got this quite complex mix of audio, video, signaling for the drone, some of it quite latency sensitive. Maybe you're also taking the video feed for an archive, which is less latency sensitive. And so where you've got that sort of composed situation with a lot going on, that's where I think that some of the programmability really comes into effect. Whereas I think that some of the traditional areas where people who look at this from, say, probably, to be honest, the CPaaS point of view, where a lot of it is phone calls and SMS, it's a little bit less complex in terms of the dynamics of how traffic is flowing around. I think there's a separate set of applications which are the machine side of it, which is where you've got maybe industrial automation, where perhaps there you're caring more about deterministic latency for, is the machine doing something every five milliseconds or something like that, or it's an AGV which is trying to navigate around a factory or an outdoor area. I think that's a separate set of applications which is probably less related to sort of communications media as we're thinking of here. The other one which I've referenced a couple of times was the fixed networks. There's a parallel world of network APIs that goes on in the fiber and optical and Ethernet space, particularly between data centers and for between internet exchange points of view. So if you're a global manufacturer and you've got different cloud applications and workloads running in 10 different data centers or on premise around the world, and you need to set up, capacity on demand between workload 7 and workload 13 in different places. There's a whole bunch of network APIs which we're not talking about here now that would deal with that, and that's where you've got massive, multi-gigabit connections with fiber between the data centers and sites. So that's a bit of a different world, but it sometimes gets lumped into this broader category of network APIs. But from the point of view of this call, I would really highlight this sort of screens versus machines distinction.
No, I think that's a very good distinction, Dean. I think it's going to be and it goes beyond, these initial level of categorization, because ultimately the use case will define, in your example, right, whether you're utilizing a communication aspect or you're utilizing, a machine-to-machine aspect. Because in the example you gave about, drone monitoring and drone maneuvering and subject matter expert coming in, I could just point out 3 different, interactions with the network right there, right? You want to ensure the guarantee of, some guarantee of the quality of the network. So your video feed is, accurate for an SME or subject matter expert to make decisions. You're determining whether you're reaching the edge of the network coverage, so you don't go outside the coverage. And you need certain level of latency. And plus you want to authenticate that this drone is authorized to actually run on the network and stream these. So there's so much network interaction happening between that single application and the network to make sure that experience stays optimal, right? So I think these are the kind of interactions we will see, how the application needs to be more aware of the network and not just, hey, I just can run on any network. And to your point earlier, right, even I would say, this network could actually cross boundaries, right? This application could cross boundaries. It may start off in a Wi-Fi side and it goes outside, and now it's on a cellular network, and all of a sudden it still has to, from an application standpoint, it should not matter to the application whether it's riding over a Wi-Fi network or a cellular network, and that experience should continue. So I'll let everybody else chime in here in terms of other use cases where we are seeing that more integrated experience of networks and applications to provide new experiences in the enterprise world. Kevin, why don't you start? What other kind of applications are you seeing?
Well, we're definitely seeing a lot of mixed network use cases. So, for instance, when we go into a factory, And we listen to them and hear that they're trying to solve a number of different problems. So it's not just about upgrading the network and buying the most recent technology. It's about how do we get to the point where we can optimize the throughput on the factory line, and how can we optimize the interaction with the with the warehousing and the delivery mechanisms. How can we reduce the risk to employees, that are on the line or moving about through the factory? All of these are, starting with the outcome. What's the use case that we need to get to, and then how do we work our way back in to the optimum capability? So in some cases, we're working with SCADA controllers that are as pointed out, as Dean pointed out, sub-millisecond interactions with a machine that is doing something. There's quality control applications that are then having to interact with the machine. And when you start thinking about it, they're not just disparate networks. You can start overlaying AI infrastructures on top to make sure that there's pattern recognition that comes up. There's instantaneous responses, shutting down a machine if needed, redirecting an AGV to accommodate now or to deliver materials in a more efficient manner. So just the factory setting, a modern cognitive factory like we've been working with, just has a series of rich interactions that are all driven by network aware applications and AI on top of the network aware infrastructure, allowing for new types of interactions and capabilities. It's not just about improving the ROI for these infrastructures, and definitely they get that. They get optimized network infrastructures. Starting with, they can start off with a private Wi-Fi and a private 4G and work their way into a 5G. They'll have Bluetooth infrastructures or different types of capabilities that all need to be looked at. So it's not just a single network infrastructure that we need to be thinking about from a network aware perspective. It is hybrid networks in the truest sense, and there are network boundaries that we all need to be looking at, and doing it properly. The applications really have no knowledge of the diverse network infrastructure underneath them.
No, I think what you just mentioned is so critical, hybrid network awareness, because where I see the challenge had been in the network APIs in the past is it's very siloed, right? So you are created a network API for a fixed network or an MPLS network or an SD-WAN network, and now we're talking about Open Gateway 5G Camara projects and all those, which are cellular networks. And nobody is really talking about cross-network APIs, or even if there are, right, they're still independent, but it has not been brought up to the application level in such a way that the applications doesn't have to understand, or even if it has to understand the type of the network, it has that intelligence to know, okay, I am riding over a Wi-Fi network now, or I'm riding over a cellular network, but regardless, my request to the network is still the same. Right? That I particularly need this level of latency or this particular bandwidth, and the underlying infrastructure is making sure it's delivering to their need.
It can even be more sophisticated than that. It might be, for example, getting location data. Yeah, and you might think, well, if I'm outdoors, I can use GPS, but increasingly GPS jamming is a thing. So maybe you want to get location data off of the local wireless network or another satellite provider. Same thing with timing and synchronization. And I think that you can also think that although you may be you may know that you're on Wi-Fi or that you're on cellular, your path to the cloud is not necessarily obvious, and maybe it's an application which has particular security or privacy requirements, and so actually you really need to know where does my data go between the device and the cloud? And if there's particular countries or particular intermediaries you would rather avoid, then ideally that's surfaced as well. And so when you start digging into this, there's a lot more to network awareness than just saying, how much download bandwidth can I get for my video? There's a lot behind the scenes, and I think that we're just at the very early stages of this. But you can certainly imagine that, let's say it's a financial transaction for high frequency trading, and you've got all sorts of interesting options, as well as the public network, a private network. Maybe you've got free space optical because you're line of sight to a data center. And there's all sorts of things that we'll start finding that crop up in very, very specialized situations. And then looking from the more the classical communication space, you might find also that there's networks which are both private and public. So increasingly you're going to see neutral host capabilities on private 4G and 5G, where you've essentially got the requirements of the public operators on a private network, and that may bring in all sorts of SLA questions, regulatory questions even as well, where you have to start partitioning between the sort of semi-public and semi-private and how they coexist.
Yeah, no, I think those are really, really interesting scenarios. Stephen, any thoughts on other applications that you're already thinking in your toolkit?
Yeah, I mean, there's a big focus is in Busan's around the mission critical applications, but there's a lot of there's an analogy there in the sports world around racing. Racing is a very interesting sport where it's primarily done in rural areas, and in a weekend 100,000 people show up and they do a race and then they leave, and then so that you have to build this ad hoc network up, and then it tears down, and every racing team has an enormous pressure to win, and are looking at more and more advanced ways of getting data off of everything from the vehicles, from the pit crews to the driver, and there's diverse. Sometimes they're in bandwidth constrained environments, and there's path diversity that may be needed, and having applications that understand the network complexities, because it's going to be different in each environment they go to around the world, understanding the network complexities of the environment they're in, and what data they can process at the edge and pull back. And every racing team is kind of looking for that competitive advantage and how to win their race. And I think that's probably another good example of where next generation applications at kind of in an edge rural environment become important. And there's a lot of dual use in a scenario like that with our military, our first responders, and our federal agencies and work that they do.
No, I think you're absolutely right. There's all sorts of different use cases and applications. Rob, what are you seeing? You have a lot of CPaaS members in your alliance who are also exploring how the network APIs come into play with their offerings, whether it's an expansion of their set of APIs or utilizing the network APIs to provide more advanced communication experiences. So what kind of applications are you seeing in the market that utilizes the communication related APIs and the new and evolving network APIs to build much more advanced experiences?
Well, I think it's pretty early days for all of this. So what we're seeing is, if you look at that set of network APIs that Project Camara is standardizing and putting forth, the security or know your customer category of APIs, right? It's clearly low-hanging fruit for CPaaS providers, because it sort of replaces, or it can replace in certain situations, the one-time passwords and all this SMS stuff. And there's issues with SMS anyway. So we're seeing that this is a nice timing to get a different approach on the security side. And then also we see RCS coming up for a more branded and rich experience. So SMS is under attack, I would say, in the CPaaS space. And a number of the CPaaS providers in our alliance are very, very serious about the network APIs. Companies like Infobip and Vonage. who have close relationships with Ericsson and Nokia. So that's very clear, makes a lot of sense. They're doubling down on that. And then I would say most of the other CPaaS providers are sort of looking at, again, the use cases. Where can they get in a reasonable and meaningful way? And then there's also a bunch of CPaaS providers that are simply not looking at the network APIs yet, or just figured that it's going to go the same way as the open API efforts of 10 or 15 years ago, which I think is not fair. I think the situation today is a little bit different than 10 or 15 years ago. So it probably makes sense for all of these CPaaS platforms to look at the capabilities and the possibilities of the network APIs that are being offered. But Dean, yeah, you want to add to this?
I would say that I completely agree. I think some of the Kamara APIs around the anti-fraud and perhaps some of the sort of location and SIM swap and stuff like that, that's a good fit with the type of CPaaS applications that are to do with transactions. It's it's the in-app messaging for Uber or an e-commerce delivery or something like that, where you need to. There's much more dependency on verification of the buyer and the seller, whether it's sort of authentication of a transaction, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Well, those are not
age verification, for example, is a big thing. Age is a big thing.
Yeah, but those applications typically are not the ones that need guaranteed network quality or a slice. I mean,
no.
I sort of stereotype it a bit when Ericsson bought Vonage. The type of developer who's sending a dentist appointment reminder SMS isn't going to be buying a network slice. But there are. Actually, I think the interesting one is that those CPaaS providers which are still doing composable video and WebRTC, which is one of the things I used to spend a lot of time looking at. I think they're closer to the sort of the drone or the AR, VR or the remote telemedicine type applications. I think that there's probably we're going to see that the sort of if it's a CPaaS player that does video, WebRTC, that type of more advanced communications, they are perhaps more in the wheelhouse for some of the network API and quality on demand. Whereas if it's a CPaaS provider that's more oriented around things like campaign management and age verification and transaction validation, then I think they'll steer more towards the sort of Kamara stuff around anti-fraud and identity.
Yeah, so there is a question also on the thread here. Will it be CPaaS versus Kamara? And I think we need to put this confusion to rest, right? Because I see there's just, every time I see something like this, CPaaS versus Kamara, and I'm like, this just tells me that just people don't understand yet. And it's, what is the difference? I think we're confusing the matter quite a bit. I think at the end of the day, CPaaS is a set of APIs, right, which is focused on communication related activity. And there is a bit of a definition of communication, and that is expanding. No, absolutely that definition of communication is expanded from SMS to voice to video, and at one point emails and other machine-to-machine communications and whatnot, right? So there's a definition of communication that is expanding, and there is a set of APIs that require that. Then there are other set of APIs that interact with network, whether it is about authenticating a device, authenticating a SIM, determining a location, requesting a quality on demand and whatnot, right? So at the end of the day, network is the common denominator in this, which is providing different capabilities for different type of applications. Now, ultimately, the use case that will require some aspects of communication, some other aspects of network will determine what APIs you will need. I think the reason we confuse this is we keep looking for who is going to deliver these both, right? And then CPaaS is a set of, companies who are focused on delivering communication related experiences and API programmability. Whether or not it makes sense for them to deliver a more advanced Kamara APIs or not, it depends. are they actually in the application business? I think somebody who's developing an application will look for both of these APIs, whether Vonage or Infobib or somebody else will become that aggregator for network API. We'll see.
It depends if they're anchored in, along with CPaaS, you often hear UCaaS and CCaaS, right? And so if you're essentially, your main business is contact center agents, or it's unified comms, what we're doing now type stuff, Teams and Zoom and the rest of it, then I think that you're probably less interested in the sort of hardcore network awareness. You're more interested in the sort of, I'll call it, communications adjacent or transaction adjacent functions like identity. So I think there's a bit of a distinction there that if it's a contact center agent using CPaaS to build that call flow or something like that, I think it's a long way away from network slicing and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I agree, but I think it's unless the providers change their definition from I am a CPaaS provider to a more advanced communication provider, and then bring in these set of different APIs to provide experiences, then I think we need to get away from labeling the provider to versus to focus on the application companies who are going to utilize both of these experiences. I think
Yeah,
that's
sorry, I think you need to look at the intent, right, that you're working towards, right? And you mentioned the use cases earlier, that's going to drive it, but let's take a look at it. I think CPaaS did a really good thing for the industry overall in terms of just disaggregating the systems that are out there. So no longer do you have to buy a full-fledged PBX or full-fledged switch. You can buy individual capabilities, and as a provider you can build the individual capabilities, stand them up, and you can drive business forward that way. I think you're starting to see the disaggregation in the O&M area under TM Forum with their ODA, and it's going down that direction as well. I think the applications, let's call them enterprise applications or consumer applications, are going to follow suit here. And so I think you're going to have kind of these categories, call them at the application layer, that are disaggregations or let's call it more component-based types of things. And I think CPaaS has led the way, in the telecom space in taking us there. The common aspect of all of these is the underlying network, and there's no reason why we should try to say, well, you're trying to make a video call, so therefore that is the same as tuning the network or optimizing the network resource to be able to do it. In fact, that component that is making the video call can use the network APIs to create an optimized experience, right? And so I think that there is confusion, but basically the CPaaS, the application world, I think they're disaggregating. Stephen called it the next generation applications or the new applications, right? I think what we're going to start to see is some type of componentization at the network layer, wrapped potentially in AI infrastructures, all driving network to be more responsive and more capable, with and that cohesion between the application layer and the network.
Yeah, I think that's very accurate, Kevin. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and play a little bit of a devil's advocate on this. We talked about the applicability of this whole network awareness and integrating network intelligence into the applications for private networks and the applicability of it in enterprise applications. Now, if I look at it on one hand, right, a lot of private network providers are going into enterprise talking about, hey, private network gives you a better network, right? Your Wi-Fi could not deliver the deterministic behavior, and now you have a better network that will deliver you some level of deterministic performance and applications to deliver that experience. Now we are talking about an additional level of assurance on that network. So if somebody is a system integrator, and I think this is a question also that I just see coming in, is can you walk through like what kind of applications require an additional value than what a private 5G will deliver to an enterprise? And can you give an example of how you're utilizing the network to steer the performance and the experience? Kevin or Stephen, since both of you have done this, if you guys can tag team on answering this question, that would be great.
Yeah, I think there's one that we're working that Stephen alluded to earlier, which is kind of the racing scenario, or you can broaden it out into potentially a universal enterprise or stadium type of use case. But let's focus on the racing aspect, right? There are certain points in time where critical actions at the application layer absolutely need to go through. You've got no choice. And so rather than over engineering the network, spending a lot of money, spending a lot of power, consuming a lot of resources on an ongoing basis, let's optimize the network so that at those given points in time, the network is responsive to the critical applications that require it, and then for the rest of the time, you can orchestrate around other applications and other experiences. So, like was stated earlier, well, you may have a drone that is broadcasting a video that the fans want to take a look at. That could that is important from an entertainment perspective, but when the race car comes into the pit, you now want to make sure that pit experience and the critical activities of the pit crew are they get priority on the network. So it's not a matter of going out. You don't want to spend a lot of money. You don't want to put a lot of resources out there. You want to give the most optimal experience on the least number of resources possible.
Stephen, anything you want to add?
It may not be that you don't want to build out a more reliable network. You may not be able to based on where you're at. So you have to smartly use the different bandwidth pipes that you have to accomplish your mission, and the data is perishable. So there's an absolute business need to get the data out as quickly as possible and in real time. So those are the scenarios, and you may have the resources to build that network, but you might be constrained by bandwidth. You might be constrained by other factors that don't allow you to build out that more robust network the way you'd like. So you have to, those instances, you have an application being aware of what network is available, and again, it's going to change every time. You want the application to work in one way every time, even though the network's changing underneath it.
Great. So Kevin, we're coming to an end towards an end here. I would wrap up with you describing, if somebody wants to get started in private networks or with network-aware applications, what do they need in the network infrastructure to achieve what we all talk about, the network awareness?
Well, I can speak to what we in Shibodi are doing, and we've created a platform that is driving network awareness of the applications. On the, let's call it the northbound, we communicate with applications in their language, their security model, their data model, and try to facilitate the applications to achieve optimal development or delivery time. So it really is about the application having that stable interface that allows them to develop the logic once and be able to deploy in a number of different scenarios, right? So that is optimizing the developer experience. On the southbound, you want to be able to integrate with the different networks. And assuming that you are going to have a variety of different network elements from a number of different vendors, even a number of different types, you do need to have that capability to work, cohesively across all of these different networks and provide especially the network insights up into the application layer. So that's the platform that we've created. It's basically it's a deployable network within an enterprise, within a carrier network, establishing that foundation that they can go out and start sourcing all of these network-aware applications. So, the other way I'll just put a plug in. We in order to make it easy for people to understand the power of the network awareness and network applications, we have created a sandbox as well, where people can come along and just very rapidly figure out, how do I augment my application and make it capable of using the network, right? So I think I think the try before you buy type of approach is critical here. As Rob said, this is very nascent. This is new stuff for a lot of people, especially when you start looking at componentization of the capabilities. How do you get in and start figuring out what works? Well, the sandbox approach, the try before you buy approach, allows developers, allows enterprises, allows carriers to come in and really figure out how it works. So, we've got Camara, we've got, our own simplified APIs, and we're continually building it out. So I think that you have to look at what are the APIs that give you the best benefit, and it can be a Camara based API, like the QOD APIs or location or the SIM swap, whatever it would be. But I really think that you need to figure out what is the pain point, what's the use case that I want to get to, how do I build it out, how can I test it out, get used to it, and then you can start figuring out how do you deploy as a developer into the different networks. You look for the APIs that are available and you try to use them to the best of your ability.
Great. I think we have come to an end here. First of all, thank you everyone for sharing such valuable perspective and experiences with network-aware applications and where the industry is heading. For those interested in exploring this topic further, I encourage you to reach out to the panelists or visit our website, privateLTE5G.com. We will continue to have more resources around this topic. Once again, a big thank you to all our panelists and all of you for joining us today. Until next time, take care and stay connected. Thank you.